Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee calling in. I'm Stephen Fenton, I'm the chair of the meeting, so welcome to everybody here and everybody watching at home. Begin with housekeeping and apologies for any guests who need to use the facilities. They're just behind me through the door on my left. Apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Callum Taylor, who's being substituted by Councillor Tony Clark. Apologies from Councillor Widowson, who's substituted by Councillor Wan. Councillor Eyre, who's substituted by Councillor Hollier, and from Councillor Rowley, who is not substituted. Next item is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare not already on their register of interest? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just to declare that I've had conversations with residents to 21 Piccadilly, so the site will be occupied by the site. Okay.
Councillor Merritt.
Can I make a similar declaration?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Can I make a similar declaration? And I've actually been exchanging emails with the head of property over some of the neighbour nuisance issues, but I don't think that affects the actual subject of the of tonight's meeting. I'll also record that in terms of some of the planning applications on this site, I was previously involved when I was a member of the Civic Trust's Transport Advisory Group on those, but again, I don't think that's pertinent to the purpose of tonight's meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, just a reminder for all members, because we're going paperless and we're using largely paperless, using our laptops. Please do bring the microphone as near as possible, even holding it up to your to speak if that would help. But I appreciate it's a lot of things to juggle. Are there any other declarations of interest, please? No. Thank you very much. That moves us on to the next agenda item, which is exclusion of press and public. So one of the confidential papers that have been shared with members is Annex K to Annex B of agenda item 5, and that document has been not made publicly available, as it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. And this information is classed as exempt under paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A to Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. Do I have members' consent to move into closed session should we at any point during the meeting wish to discuss the contents of that paper? Are members content with that proposal? Thank you. The next item is the minutes of the previous call-in meeting held on the 2nd of October 2023. Do any members have any comments on the minutes? I've got one slight amendment to propose, but if I take any of the comments first. No. So my comment was it's on page 5 of the report pack. Partway down the page, it states, during the process outlined above, it was confirmed that, and then there are a number of bullet points. The second bullet point states that the choice of formula was different from the one put forward by the call-in members, but was not considered incorrect. There were obviously differing views expressed at the meeting in terms of the formula used. what I'd like to suggest is an amendment to that sentence by the addition of some words to the end. So it would read, if members are content, the choice of formula was different from the one put forward by the calling members, but was not considered incorrect by the executive members. Because otherwise it could be read as inferring that was Councillor Hollier's view, which it wasn't. But ultimately, no breach was found and the decision stood. Do any members have any problem with that amended form of words? No? Okay. So we're happy to approve the minutes with that minor amendment. Thank you. We now move to public participation. We have 2 registered speakers today, the first of whom joins us via Zoom, and that is Chris Bush from York Business Improvement District. Can you hear us, Chris?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. So you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee, and just as a reminder, if I can ask you to focus your remarks on the issue at hand in the sense of the called-in decision. So you'll have 3 minutes, Chris, in your own time.
Thank you very much. So to start, at a recent meeting of the York Bid Board, Councillor Officers Catherine Daly and David gave the board an update on the Castle Gateway project. Councillor Kilbane was also in attendance and declared his interest as CYC portfolio holder for economy and transport. The update was comprehensive and highlighted revisions to the original plan. The key points emerging from that were the finance previously envisaged to be raised through the development of Castle Mills was no longer viable, that ambitions to close Castle Car Park and turn the space into new public realm remain, that the plans to develop the new multi-storey car park on St George's Field has been aborted, and there is a new proposal to reconfigure that car park with slightly increased capacity. Overall, the new proposal would create a net loss of 290 car parking spaces for the city centre. As a reminder, for the past 5 years, the bid's position has been to support Castle Gateway on the premise that the multi-storey car park is built. The decision was based on board discussions and consultation with bid members. Furthermore, a survey of GPS data conducted in 2022 highlighted that Castle Car Park is the most popular of the 50 major car parks in the city centre, as it serves both locals, tourists, and supports the early evening economy. If the bid and wider business community is to support an alternative proposal around the closure of Castle Car Park, the bid board have highlighted a number of key issues that would first need addressing, which are wider improvements to public transport, including extending operating hours and ride, general improvements to Coppergate car park, such as cleaning, repainting, and 24-hour opening, better signage to city centre car parks, especially for visitors travelling from the south who currently use Castle Car Park, better parking technology to allow dynamic occupancy at low usage periods, and lastly, examples should be found from other cities on how enhanced public realm has driven footfall in their area. The bid directors understand the need for green ambitions, but car parking remains an important subject to many city centre businesses. This is seen as a major factor on how York competes against out-of-town shopping centres and other external retail offerings. If the City Council is to remove the most popular car park in the city centre, the businesses must have evidence that this will not reduce footfall and spend. The bid board will welcome regular consultation on revised plans so that it can communicate to its members and be able to take a future decision on whether it can support Castle Gateway going forward. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Gwen Swinson, who's joining us here Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Bush. Our second speaker is Gwen Swinson, who joins us here in person. So you'll have 3 minutes, Gwen, in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just raise an administrative issue on the agenda? You know, the private item, we have, as members of the public, we've got no idea whether it's about legal, about finance, about staffing. In the past, it's been the case that you've been able to have a title on the item at least. But now we don't have no clue what it's about. It constrained my comments. I just wanted to leave that with you if I could.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You're okay, Deb? Thank you, Chair. When I finally navigated the agenda and found the call-in items and read them, I couldn't help but agree with both of them. When I read the executive report, I also had sympathy with some of the aspirations in that plan too, with significant exceptions. However, this executive decision looks far too rushed. Had an in-principle paper been submitted with detailed financials, then follow up individual reports on each dimension with full business case, financials, risks, and other implications, then I could have understood. The executive report, besides being far too rushed and perfunctory in my view, had virtually zero evidence base, a smattering of rounded to the nearest million financials, and gave members no options. These are separately massive decisions, none of which is based on professional democratic reports, including this one, in my view. Rushing so much through in one paper is bound to be a problem, particularly with the track record of this authority. Perhaps the unnamed pink paper might add some light. I expect not. I have to say, and I wish I didn't have to, this administration seems to be repeating the failures of the last Labour administration, which had laudable high ideals but fell at the first post. That time it was transport being their very costly undoing. No one can forget the Lendal Bridge fiasco, Coppergate and so on. I know it is futile. There is only one Labour member, the Deputy Chair, who was around to have learned the lessons from before. But all I can ask is that this whole enterprise is revisited as a whole and then separately with proper research, business cases, financials and legal elements. I hope this administration is big enough to slow this down so proper processes and reports can be prepared and considered. Let's not repeat. Finally, at the succinct decision session at Executive, Councillor Eyre raised the matter of a loss of over 20 million resulting from this Labour plan with nothing to show for it. Councillor Kilbane refused to answer then, but I think we need to know, for that huge loss, can this scrutiny establish what we will be getting in its place? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Swinburne. Well under your 3 minutes. Okay, so those are the public participants. So we can now move on to agenda item 5, which is the called-in item, Castle Gateway update report and next steps. And that was the decision arising from the executive meeting on the 16th of November. I'll briefly set out for the benefit of members how the call-in process will run as per the Appendix 5 of the Constitution. This is a slightly different call-in in that there are 2 call-ins that we're considering this evening. So I've tried my best to, I will try my best to use my discretion to ensure that we stick to the principles set out in the Constitution and give everyone the opportunity to take part in the meeting and have their say. So we have 2 call-in members, Councillors Stewart, Nichols and Waters, and then Councillor Eyre. And Councillor Stewart and colleagues will speak first, and then Councillor Eyre will speak second. Each call-in team will have 7.5 minutes to present their case. So they will speak in turn, and then we will have a session lasting no more than 30 minutes. That's the amount of time allocated. We don't have to fill the 30 minutes. That's entirely up to members. There'll be a maximum of 30 minutes for members to pose questions to the call-in members. So you will all be sitting with us at the table, and members can direct a question at any particular call-in member, or can direct the same question at both call-in members. But I would ask for Councillor Stewart and colleagues to nominate a sort of primary spokesperson for that Q&A session. So that there'll be an opportunity for members to question the call-in members. There'll be no opportunity for executive members to question the call-in members, or for the call-in members to pose questions to the executive members. That's not how this works. So once we've concluded that Q&A session with the call-in members, the executive members will then have up to 15 minutes to respond to the assertions made by the call-in members. We will then move into a Q&A session with the executive members. And we will again have no more than 30 minutes for that Q&A session. If at any time during that session there are questions from members that are of a technical or legal nature that for which officer support is required, then officers are welcome to come to the table to assist. And then we will move into some summing up statements before we get to take a vote amongst members as to whether or not there has been a breach. So that's the theory. So we'll see how we get on, but I'm sure we'll be fine. Just as a reminder, the call-in process is designed to be inquisitorial rather than adversarial. As we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the confidential annex that we've agreed to go into private session to discuss, should there be any questions or observations any members would want to make. I would ask that if we get to that point, members indicate if they do wish to discuss any matters contained within the confidential papers, and then we would need to move to private session at that point. Okay, and I suppose as a final reminder, we're here to discuss the specific reasons set out in the call-in request, and if we can focus our questions and discussion on the specific issues raised in the call-in request, that would be appreciated. Obviously, it was a big report covering lots of ground. The decisions have been called in on very specific points, and the discussion really must focus on those. So if I could ask for members' cooperation, that would be appreciated. Okay, so if I could invite Councillor Stewart, Nichols and Waters, if they would like to join us at the table. So you will have a combined total of 7.5 minutes to address the committee. Would you like a 30-second warning, or are you happy to wing it?
You just 2.5 minutes. 2.5.
Right, we can do that, can't we?
Yeah. Once on public meeting, Popcorn's company will say when I give some brief opening remarks, they're 18 minutes long. So
yeah. Okay, so after 2.5 minutes, we'll make a signal of some sort, and then you'll know you're a third of the way through. Okay. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, members. So this call-in is about the general aspect of the way that council makes decisions, with a very particular focus on Castle Gateway. So we don't have the next Guildhall, so we don't have the next community stadium. What we've seen is Castle Gateway being a project that's gone on for many, many years. I would say gone off in one direction at vast expense, now turning into a different direction at vast expense. And we've all got the 22nd of February in the diary as when we're going to have the budget, and we're going to be told there's no money left and everything like that. And the point of this call-in is that this is millions and millions of pounds that are not being properly scrutinised and not being properly spent, and there's key aspects to this decision that we really want to question. So we've said that Spark, for example, was meant to be temporary, meant to be for a brief period, and it's going to be essentially a decade at a low rate, on a low rent on a prime city centre site, and we don't believe there's been enough thought as to what else could be done with that. We've said on car parking, sorry, on the Coppergate Centre, that the leaseholder, freeholder is getting the very much the better of this deal. Some minor improvements that they will benefit from, and a fantastic great lease extension, and we're not seeing any great tangible detail on that. And then on car parking, there's two aspects to it: that the loss in revenue to the council, if the St George's multi-storey was to be cut, is so significant potentially, and it's not tangibly looked at in any sort of way for how that'll be made up, but also the damage it will do to business if we do see a reduction in car parking spaces. And finally, just on the sort of detail of things in the report and the way these decisions are made, I've just had an email saying that in the York Central Steering Group meeting on Thursday, there will be no refreshments due to financial constraints. So the sort of £3 to £4 in manpower and tea and coffee is being taken off the table as they discuss tens of millions of pounds. An utterly absurd situation. Here we have millions and millions of pounds the council is not scrutinising. You have one particular page, we have 4 key figures, 1 million, 2 million, 1 million. Well, there's rounding and then there's rounding. So what we're calling for is a realistic assessment of what this project should be doing. Castle Gateway is not one unique area. It is several different points the council has taken together. 17 to 21 Piccadilly in particular could be dealt with without any knock-on impact whatsoever on other parts. It's not some sort of ransom strip. It's not some sort of gateway. We need a cross-party approach to these things to truly discuss what's right for York.
2.5 minutes.
And finally, we need, true business scrutiny. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I knew we would spill over that 2.5 minutes. I'll do it in a slightly different way, just go through it in order that it's down in your executive decisions on page 11. Turning to Spark first, I think it's completely and utterly unacceptable to be even considering an extension of the lease. That lease, if extended, would have spanned 3 different council administrations. So I can understand that there'll be people around this table who won't have had any experience of what's been going on, might think it's a good idea to extend it, but I would suggest you actually speak to the residents who every time there's been an extension have been promised that'll be the last one, In planning terms, multiple temporary planning permissions are not good practice. And obviously, if you extend the lease, the planning permission is virtually a shoo-in. It's unacceptable in redevelopment terms because it's continued use as the Spark operation. It's actually holding up development inquiries. It's actually certainly holding up development progress. I can remember developers in 2017 saying it'll become permanent by default, which it clearly seems to have done. In July 20 at the planning meeting, Historic England were referring the council to the fact that there was no clear mechanism for a sale of the site. Now, if you extend the lease, it'll be 6 years after they made those comments, and still the site has not been sold and properly redeveloped. But again, I focus as much as anything on those poor neighbours to this site. In terms of Castle Mills, like the Spark site, development is, of course, needed, but not with a scheme that's run by City of York Council. We need a political consensus and good decision-making to put all of this in the hands of private developers. As Councillor Stewart mentioned, you don't want another Guildhall. Cost overruns and absolutely appalling business decisions made there, as I keep highlighting on the cost to the revenue budget. And I know we're not supposed to criticise officers, but if you're not going to criticise them, you don't get to the bottom of why you're in the financial mess as a local authority that we are now. In terms of St George's Field and Castle Car Park.
2.5 minutes.
Ugh. Well, I'm linking the 2 items together because the multi-storey car park was a ludicrous proposal, being as ugly as it was expensive. An executive are completely right to confirm that it will not proceed. But there needs to be a car park provision retained at the Castle Car Park. The council's revenue depends on it. The city centre businesses' revenue depend on it, just as you've heard tonight. And I would suggest, as I've suggested before, disabled spaces are kept on tarmac close to Castlegate, and for the rest of the site around Clifford's Tower, it goes down to grasscrete. Best of both worlds. You can park on it and you've got a green space for other events. And I better hand over quickly before I get in trouble.
Thank you. Just to stick into the why we called you in, and it's just 1 or 2 things I picked up. On page 14, you talk about blue badge retention, and this will occur when a revised scheme has been approved for delivery. It doesn't say delivered, it says approved for delivery, and it just sounds like another drag where something will be promised, it never actually occurs. In terms of consulting the public, we were in the middle of a transport consultation, yet throughout this it keeps referring to delivering a transport plan, and yet that doesn't conclude till next year. So I'm not sure what it's referring to when we have a plan in the middle of being consulted over. So the public have been asked for their view, and yet we keep talking about the public being listened to. It seems a contradiction. And as regarding Spark and how popular it is, Visit York doesn't even include it in its own website to say, come to York to visit the pile of containers. So I'm not sure how much that is attracting 400,000 people setting off from Bath to come and visit York to see a container and buy some cheap food. Car parking, as Chris has touched on, we talk about loss of money, and yet we'll have to chuck away 290 odd car parking spaces. And I can't find what the cost of that is in this. It may be I just have too much to read, but how much is that going to cost us? George's feel, I say, again, it's rounded up, we just lose up to £1 million. Is that £1 or £999,000? Using phrases up to and from, it sounds like a sale going on again. And what consultation have we had with the university? Again, it may be in there, but we talk about retaining high quality jobs. York University has got 4 subjects in the top 10 retention in performance for graduates. Where are they going? Have we actually found out where they go and why they're going there, and how do we get them to stay in York? What do they want? We talk about affordable housing, but does a graduate want affordable housing?
If you could draw your remarks to a close, please.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, well done. You can return to your seats in the back row temporarily and call up the second calling in member. So, Councillor Eyre. You will have 7.5 minutes, Altis Hill.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's clear that there are policy differences. It's fine to disagree. The administration can lay out their shifting priorities and present their case. This needs to be evidenced and open and transparent to allow public and members to scrutinise. This paper did not do that. The paper merely restated what the administration promised pre-election, with no consideration of consequence, no detailed financial analysis, and no options. The public and members have deliberately been kept from seeing the true financial scale of implementing these policies. The reality is, when added together as a conservative estimate, it's up to £10 million loss on capital, and by May 2027, a further £5 million in lost revenue. That's up to £15 million of taxpayers' money burnt in a bonfire of vanities. As if that wasn't bad enough, this is burning £15 million of taxpayers' money at the height of a local government financial crisis. Even worse, it's burning £15 million of taxpayers' money at the height of a local government financial crisis to do nothing. The scheme was inherited, cost £34.1 million to build, with an income of £42.5 million. That delivered 130 new homes, £8.4 million of gain to the taxpayer, and a 30% reduction in parking. The proposals put forward have no costings, no income, no homes, no gain, and a 50% reduction in parking, and no funding for the public realm. Castle Mills alone, 100 homes, developer gain, with planning agreed. The options for the new scheme, allowing planning to lapse and splitting the schemes, reduces the scope. The maximum achievable is probably about 80 homes. At 100% affordable, that's only £7 million. Even if you see a reduction in build costs to about 22 million, you're nowhere near delivering that site. If 80 units were for rent, the £500 million brings in less than £500,000 per annum, dwarfed by borrowing costs to build a scheme of 1.2 to 1.9 million. There is no evidence a 100% affordable scheme can be delivered. The exec should not be dropping the existing scheme without a costed alternative. In summary, up to £10 million in lost gain and £2 million written off entirely. Castle Car Park, Labour called that decision in December 2021. Councillor Kilbane said it was premature before LTP4 and there was no full parking review. That parking review was over 75 pages long. This is barely one. The LTP4 is still out to consultation. That call-in was not needed as we had already committed to that parking review before making a decision. We still are, and this should have been brought before this decision. The figures in the report are wrong. Castle last year was £1.6 million, not the £1 million in income in paragraph 24. This year, it's on track to be even more, nearly 900,000 by the 6-month period, not including Christmas. Paragraph 23 quotes a borrowing figure from nowhere. 1.1 million equates to around £15 million of borrowing. The case for the multi-storey car park was only £3 million of borrowing. The true comparison is losing 1.6 million of income versus around about £240,000 borrowing per annum on the original case, or even only 1.2 million if it was entirely borrowed. So again, this is a do-nothing option. A do-nothing option costing 800,000 to 1.6 million pounds per annum. This figure would, of course, increase another million if Coppergate closes, a glaring omission from the analysis. In summary, by May 2027, that's a loss to the taxpayer of between £3.5 and £6 million. I wanted to end by reflecting on those eye-watering numbers. This year, £1 million abortive costs. Next year, £3 million abortive costs and up to £1.6 million in lost revenue. That's £5.6 million by 2025. By 2027, that equates to 8.8 million, in addition to the £10 million lost capital income. That's without a spade in the ground on the public park. That works out over £20 million of taxpayers' money for one public park. That's the worst case scenario, and some may be redeemable. Hence, I was generous in my assessment at the beginning of £15 million. Just imagine what this council could do with £15 million over 3 years. The numbers are staggering and need a full detailed analysis before any decisions are taken. And all of that is without even going into the wider economic impact of the decisions in terms of halving parking, scrapping the public event space, the future of Coppergate, and whether there's a future for retail in the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So if you would like to stay there, Councillor Eyre, and would the other calling in members like to return to the table? If you could sit where you have access to a microphone, that would be good. Okay, so we now move into an opportunity for members to ask questions of the calling in members. You can direct a question at, you can ask all calling in members to respond, but if I ask Councillors Stewart, Waters and Nichols to, if there is a question posed to all calling in members, then you decide between the three of you which one is going to answer it, and then obviously Councillor Eyre can answer. Or if members want to direct a question at a particular calling in member, then they're free to do that. We will have up to 30 minutes for this session. And again, if I can ask members if we can focus on the calling in reasons, as obviously that's what we're here to come to a view as to the robustness of what's set out in the calling in request. So, who would like to ask a question? Councillor Merritt.
Yeah. This project was always a high-risk project. If you go back to the 27 master plan and the 28 business case, you were talking about in the 2018 report a £55 million capital project, which was highly dependent on the sale and commercial benefit from the two particular sites in Piccadilly. Right from the start, there was a funding gap. And that has continued. By 2020, there were already questions about the original project. By October 2020, there were already questions about the January 2020 decisions and business case as a result of COVID and so on. We know that in terms of the most important site, the Castle Mills site, you were in trouble. The previous administration was in trouble with the developers there, and the agreement with some of those particular people was terminated in June 2022. So, you know, we are almost 2 years on from when the council knew the existing project was in trouble. So when Councillor Eyre refers to eye-watering costs and a bonfire of vanities, I think the question is whose vanities?
Okay.
Because we have inherited, the new administration has inherited an extremely difficult position on this. I note that in the last update under the previous administration, despite the fact there are already clearly significant abortive costs at that point, they weren't actually detailed in that paper. There was no financial case, there were no options that you're now calling for at this stage. So why, when clearly there were urgent decisions required by the executive to deal with the inherited situation, are you asking for more requirements than you did when you did your last update?
So is that a question for Councillor Eyre?
Question to Councillor Eyre.
Okay. Thank you.
Be considerably briefer than that one. I have the valuation report from 2022, and the valuation report from 2022 demonstrate the business case was as strong as it was in 2019. So there was no change in terms of that. I have seen no convincing evidence to show that that business case isn't still robust from January 2022 through to 2023, where we are now. Obviously, the public have not been allowed to see that. This administration has made sure that that information is not in the public domain. But the sales figures look entirely as strong as they always have done in terms of that one, and the build costs are in a similar position. So there is no material change in the business case figures that I've seen that would make me think that it's entirely not viable. It wasn't not viable in 2022. What has changed significantly is the administration's decision not to sell 80 of those homes at market value, and not to build a multi-storey car park, and not to sell 17 to 21 Piccadilly. That's the only things that have changed. We were told at executive, the director did say that there was concerns around the housing market, and yet you were here at Scrutiny on last week, I think, when we were discussing housing sales on the York Central site, and the director said he was fully confident in York's housing market, and there wasn't an issue in terms of house sales going forward, and he had no reason to doubt there would be a problem with house sales. So the answer is quite simply, there is no demonstrable shift in the robustness of the business case from when it was presented in 2020 through to subsequent revisions. And in terms of options, I have the 2020 report. There was huge amounts of options. I think there was 5 different options were brought forward at that particular period in time. There has not been the same level of options brought forward since that point, because it was paused post-COVID. We would have brought forward, as should have happened, a report post-May, had we been still in administration, that would have included the full parking review that we promised, that was asked for by the previous Labour opposition. We would have brought that forward with a full, open, transparent business case, so everybody could input into what is one of the most significant and most important decisions this council will take.
Thank you. Looking for questions from other members for any of the calling in members. Quick question from me to Councillor Eyre. One of the calling reasons talks about insufficient consideration having been given to the risk of securing future development of the Castle Mill site, may be more problematic as a result of components of the development having been decoupled. Is that a reference to the planning permissions, the nature of the planning decision that was made in 20, I can't remember what year it was, 2020, I think. Is that what you're referring to there?
As some members were around about the time of that particular planning, it was a contentious planning decision. It was a difficult planning decision. The height of the building was something that was objected to on various grounds, and it was deemed to cause harm to the conservation zone at that particular point at that height. The mitigating circumstances around that were the enabling development, which was the development of the bridge and the redevelopment of the Eye of York in terms of the public event space. Those were the two things weighed against in planning balance versus the presumption in terms of refusal. Those were the only reasons why that site was able to gain planning permission for that number of units, which was around about 100. Given that this report states quite clearly that those will be developed anyway without the Castle Mills development, the Castle Mills development no longer has any of those enabling. Therefore, the height and massing would in no way be in position to achieve planning. Therefore, anything that happens on that site would be significantly smaller. If you lost one floor, probably down to 80. If you had to lose 2 floors, you could be down to 60 homes on that particular site. Obviously, that has a huge impact both on the usability of that site and also on any potential gain to the taxpayer for that site. It also obviously has a material impact on the value of the site should this calling be successful, and this goes back to executive. An executive, for example, decide that they wish to sell a site, either it's 100% affordable or in terms of market sale. The value of the site probably down by 40 to 50% just on that decision to let planning permission lapse, knowing full well that any future planning permission would have to be a significantly smaller scheme.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is to Councillor Eyre in relation to the housing revenue account. In the calling in, you mentioned the potential impact as a consequence of the changes that are being raised, and clearly that would have a wider citywide impact on the ability of the authority to address ongoing costs and maintenance. So it's really understanding the background to the call in on that particular point.
Yeah, I think as I want to reiterate, the housing scheme that was approved at the time entirely washed its face. There was no need for any taxpayer subsidy to build those houses. There was no cost. There was a short-term borrowing cost in terms of upfront to do that, in terms of before you get around to selling the homes themselves, which then starts to repay it. But overall, there was no, from the housing side of it, there was no cost for taxpayer. The 3.3 million shortfall that Councillor Merritt alluded to was in terms of building the multi-storey car park and everything else. So the actual housing side of it was always a net generator of income. If this was to be built out as 100% affordable homes from the figures I've seen, and again, these are not in public domain and people are not able to see it, it would be a significant loss to the council to do that, or any registered provider to build on that particular scale. If the housing revenue account was to take that loss, there would be significant borrowing required to build those homes over and above what is actually achievable in terms of the sale. And all of that obviously has to be paid back. The gap I highlighted there was probably around 14 million if you work on around £80,000 per million borrowed. It gives you some idea of what that might cost.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any further questions to the calling in members. So thank you very much. You'll get to come back at the end to make any final remarks you wish, but for now, if you can return to the back row, thank you. Okay, so we now move on to the next step in this process, which is for the executive members. We have Councillor Kilbane and Councillor Lomas with us this evening. You will have between you 15 minutes to respond to the assertions relating to the failure to meet the principles as set out in the calling notices. Yep, so you have up to 15 minutes. Do you want a indication at halfway, or are you happy to halfway? Yeah, okay, right, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go over some of the figures, because some of the things that have been said from the end of the table, I think were a bit confused and confusing. So when the old Lib Dem Green administration committed us to developing the projects as they were then set out, including the multi-storey car park Folly, they committed us to the costs of doing the development. And these costs are capitalised when the project comes to fruition. But if the plan is clearly nonsense, as everyone told them so about the multi-storey car park at the time, then the costs have to be charged to revenue. That is how it works. Some of the costs can, in some circumstances, be transferred to alternative capital projects, which is why the figures are presented in the report as up to £1 million for the multi-storey car park. The costs for the other elements are not being written off, and it doesn't say in the report that they are being written off. They're given for transparency, something that Councillor Eyre certainly is very keen on. We're changing those elements of the project, not scrapping them, and we can salvage something useful from the disaster we inherited with the previous contractor for Castle Mills abandoning the project a year before the election, and the old Lib Dem Green administration doing nothing about it from that point on. After that contractor pulled out, it became clear to us, taking over at the election, that it's not feasible to deliver the project as it was originally set out right now. So we're carrying on with income generating meanwhile use by Spark for the Piccadilly site and seeking meanwhile use for Castle Mills until it is the right time to develop them. Officers are currently fully calculating the cost of the old Lib Dem Green administration's multi-storey car park folly, but it's likely to be between 500,000 and £1 million. The worst case scenario is put in public papers for transparency. It makes absolutely no financial sense to spend millions on a multi-storey car park that will stand virtually empty years before the original estimate said it would pay for itself. The cost of the multi-storey car park is £15 million. The revenue costs for the borrowing year on year for that are £1.1 million for 40 years. Building that multi-storey car park would commit this council to paying £1.1 million from revenue every year for the next 40 years. And I just want to clarify something about the car parking income. Councillor Eyre is quite right. The car parking income is 1.6 or was 1.6 million last year. We are saying we would only lose 1 million of that because we estimate that the other 600,000 would be replaced by displaced parking at our other car parking sites, which are largely underused for the majority of the year. So we will replace £600,000 of the 1.6 million. And of course, we're saving £1.1 million per year by not building a multi-storey car park. So the council's revenue budget will be better off by doing this. I just want to address Spark. I've made my feelings about Spark very clear during the executive meeting, but there have been some wild assertions that Spark aren't paying a market value rent, which we can confirm is not the case. I don't know where that rumour has come from, but it is not the case, and I'm sure the officers will be able to confirm it once we go into private session in the appropriate way. I just want to say a little bit about principles of decision making. Our principles for decision making in the Constitution ask us to have respect for human rights and equality of opportunity, and this is covered by our EACH principles. There is a presumption of openness, transparency and public accountability, which we clearly did by making the decisions in public. We have a clarity of aim and desired outcome. We've referred to the My City Centre consultation and the new recently renewed City Centre vision and our council plan. I think it's rather odd to say that relevant facts, legislation and considerations haven't been considered. Of course they have. It's a very lengthy paper. It's all in there. And we have taken advice, professional advice from officers, both before, during and in our decision making in the meeting. Of course, options have been considered. One of the options would have been to pursue the folly that the former administration pursued. And we decided not to do that because we had ample information to suggest that we should not. And we pursued a different option, as is our right as the executive. So I don't believe that we've breached the principles of decision making in the Constitution. And I hope that members will keep those things in mind when they make their decision this evening.
Thanks, Councillor Lomas. Just to run through the points that the councillors have raised today that Councillor Lomas hasn't already covered. I fully welcome Councillor Stewart's offer of cross-party approach on this and joint working, and absolutely commit to proper scrutiny of the decisions as they're made. I think it is worth mentioning at this point that where financial decisions are being made, in the executive decisions, it does say subject to a full business case being brought to the executive. So these are the in principle decisions accepted. Some people don't think there's enough information in them, but it shows what we're going to do on this site, because we are going to do something on this site. It's been laying around doing nothing for too long. But as the sites are developed out, the business case, each business case will have to be approved by executive and fully welcome input from other parties into that process, preferably pre-decision, where we can have a bit more input and it's slightly less combative, I think might be the phrase that you could use for the way that some of councillors speak at these meetings. In terms of the low rent, the alleged low rent for Spark pays a market rent. We're happy to go into details, but we'll have to go into closed session for that. And similarly, the Coppergate deal, we think is a good deal. But again, we'd have to go into closed session to go through. I'm happy to do that and go through the details of that. The car parking damage to business, we've been talking a lot to business about this. And I think we're all, most of us are on the same understanding that what matters to business is footfall, not how people get there. But actually driving the footfall. And I think where you're developing public realm and improving the culture of a place and making a place more attractive, it can be very difficult to make a business case to that, to say what this investment in public realm will add to business. But we see it repeated throughout the world, that where public realm is enhanced and places are made into spaces that people want to go to, it drives footfall and then drives spend. You can see what's happening right now with the markets in town and the way that that's driving spend and driving footfall. And we're getting some good reports from businesses that are not part of the market, but are doing okay. I better hurry up a little bit, I guess. Councillor Waters, the residential complaints, I think, are dealt with through the planning permission process and neighbourhood enforcement officers. And there was, I think, a compromise at the last planning permission, when the last planning permission was granted by committee, that some of the operation times to Spark were reduced. We don't think it's holding up development or sale of the site because there's been little interest market-wise, but obviously our ambition is also to deliver housing that the residents of York can afford, because our residents can't afford to live in our town. And as a council, as landowners, we're in a position to try and do something about that, which we will do. Residents understand that comes with opportunity cost, but you know, the opportunity for them is to be able to live in the town where they were born and where they work. Castle Mills site, totally agree. I think we need to work with partners. I personally don't think it should be something that we take on ourselves, but you know, the options will come forward for that. But we are talking to other partners. But again, we want to deliver homes that the people of York can afford, and not just be selling them off to the highest bidder. What am I looking at? I think Councillor Nichols, yes, we will deliver. I fully understand why you're saying we're talking about delivery, and it sounds like promises. We will deliver well as quickly as we can, taking all the right steps that we need to take to make sure we're delivering sound projects. The reduction in car parking will happen if we're successful with our transport plan to reduce driven miles by 20%. You can't reduce the amount of car miles that are driven without reducing the amount of cars. So we will face a reduction in parking. And we need to, as a council, we need to learn how to deal with that and how to cope with that, because it does have financial implications. As for cheap food at Spark, I don't know where you normally eat, Councillor Nichols, but I've never found it particularly cheap, but you know, good value. And I think Councillor Lomas has been through the other figures on parking revenue. So quickly, Councillor, to be accused of doing nothing is quite take some cheek on your part, where literally every scheme that you put together for that site fell apart at the seams. The schemes that we inherited, I think, to use the phrase of your administration, are schemes that were already dead in the water. So we're just kind of getting on and dealing with that and talking to everybody that needs to. In terms of the parking review, I mean, you had a parking review. It was published in November 22. It's really good, extensive research from the York bids that they gave to your administration, which was ignored. If you'd read it, you would have seen that at times, or maybe you did read it and then just ignored it, I don't know. But you would have seen that the Castle car park is indeed the most popular car park, but it's only normally at capacity at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, at which time other car parks very close by are only half full. And we know that, and we know there is capacity within the parking system, but we do have an overall aim to reduce the number of car journeys into the city, because you can see what kind of chaos that can cause and its implications for public transport, etc. So we will get to grips with that. Finally, just, you know, in terms of there was a great big mandate, an election last May, and we were elected to build homes that York residents can afford, and elected to build genuinely affordable homes on council-owned land. That is the mandate that we were elected with. That is what we will see through. If you're calling for us to delay work on the bridge, Councillor, then I'm afraid that will put the funding in jeopardy, because it is funded by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and we need to get on and deliver that project like they would expect us to. So again, it's kind of it's kind of reminds me of what happened under the last administration, where things just get left, and then the money falls away. And I think I've addressed most of the points that were raised in the presentation.
Yeah, 12 minutes. Thank you. Excuse me. So now it's an opportunity for members of the committee to put questions to the executive members. If at any point a question is raised that which is of a technical or legal or specialist financial nature, and you want to ask an officer to come to the table, then please do so. So, Councillor Merritt, first in again.
Yeah, Councillor Kilbane made the point, as does the original exec papers, that a business case will be produced prior to any proposals to affect the Castle car park. That is obviously important. Could I ask him if, when that business case is produced, that there will also be a paper on the parking implications, mitigations, and so on, that respond to the issues raised by the York bid speaker earlier?
Yes, certainly, and we actually went through that with the York bid board last week. Went through some of the mitigations. I don't think the number of car parking spaces that were lost that they quoted was accurate. I think it was less than that. Officers can give more detail on that. But what we need to do is maintain the footfall. So we actually want there to be more people going to that site than currently we have. But we need them to move there in a different way, so that we can utilise the space more efficiently. And that will mean making sure that we can provide better transport systems, whether that's walking, using a wheelchair, wheeling, cycling, getting public transport. We've got to make them desirable options through the local transport plan. But at the moment, I mean, as anybody knows who's tried to catch a bus in York over the last couple of weekends, you're just snarled up in traffic. So, you know, the buses are running, are being delayed through no fault of their own by the traffic. So we need to deal with the traffic, and that's what the transport plan seeks to do. So this does have to be seen in the round of the transport plan. And they're really difficult issues that this administration is prepared to get to grips with. You know, bear in mind there should have been a transport plan ready for 2021, but the previous administration put it off. So it's we will get to grips with it, and we will get things moving on this site. And I think decoupling them actually makes that a lot easier, because you can get on with sort of one thing at a time, as and when the funding allows as well, because, you know, that's not been raised or asked here tonight. It's like, where's the money going to come from? Well, we do need to have some pipeline projects ready for the incoming mayoral combined authority. So there is actually a little bit of a rush to crack on with some of the scoping works, so that we're in a good position to take advantage of that mayoral combined authority cash when it arrives in May. So there are funding opportunities out there, and we want to make sure this council's in a place where it can make the most of them.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Either executive member, really. Could you just give us some indication on the major components of the scheme, when we're actually likely to see them? So, you know, when are we likely to see the green outdoor play park space? When are we likely to see affordable houses built on the two sites? And just an indication of broadly just a year. I don't need it down to the exact month, but just some indication of this scheme has ended as it was currently constituted. You want to embark on a new scheme. What's the likely timescales for that? As the report coming back to the call-in members, it is very broad, and you've set a direction asking for a business case, but you've already narrowed down the options.
Who'd like to have a go at that?
Yes, yeah, sure. So I think what we would certainly in terms of the affordable housing, it's finding partners that we can work with to deliver it. So for Spark Piccadilly, that'll be at least another couple of years because of the extension to their lease. That we've got to try and get that into a position where we can get some affordable housing on there. It could well be with sort of retail sort of space on the ground floor, but you know, making that work. And we are looking for another home for Spark because we think they're a really valuable part of York. For the Castle Mill site, that's going to be we are in conversations with partners, but they're very early days sort of conversations. So we're trying to work up that to be viable, to make sure that the homes that residents can afford. And I don't know about timescales on that, to be honest, Councillor Healy. It will depend upon how those talks go, but we'll have to have a cut-off point at some point if if we can't make it work. But we're going to give it our best shot to make sure that it does work, because we need to deliver affordable homes, and we've gotten a lot of support from that. It's just a question of making it all stack up. The Eye of York, so sort of the Castle car park area, what we need to do primarily is make sure that we've got the services in place so that it can be used for alternative uses, and hopefully that, what I've asked officers to do is to look at working up schemes that can deliver that sort of basics this year. If we're going to repurpose it this year, so that, I don't know, let's say by next Christmas we had a lovely Christmassy fun fair on there and some more stalls down there and all kinds of nice sort of attractive things going on, people going to the museum and all that kind of space. If we're going to have those things in place, we need to have those services, so electrics, water, etc., in place, and they should be. I've charged officers with trying to deliver that this year. The longer term stuff, the park, the connecting with the riverside again, embracing that part of the river, putting in the permeable surfaces that Councillor Waters talked about, so that we don't get so much runoff and flooding. All those sort of biodiversity things, all the things that people want to see on there, as well as it being a usable space for events and, I don't know, gigs or whatever that we're going to use it for. I think we'd be looking into the second or third year of the administration for that. By the time we've got all those plans together, but hopefully sooner rather than later. And again, with the repurposing of St George's, schemes are already in place that will need to be adapted, and then it's a question of going out and finding the finance to be able to do it. So I think timelines on that I'd be struggling with to give you, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Actually, it's not supplementary, it's a new question.
Well, I'll just come back with a quick supplementary on the back of that. In terms of you mentioned discussions around a new approach for the Castle Mills site. Obviously, the plan approved involved a certain quantum of development in order for that business case to stack up, as Councillor Eyre alluded to. In terms of what you're looking at for the site, are you anticipating a similar quantum of development in terms of number of units, or are you looking at a sort of a different proposition?
Well, I think, just to be clear, the planning permission lapses this month for that site. So it's not that we've sat around waiting. The planning permission ran out most of it ran out, 2.5 years of it ran out during the previous administration's failed attempts to develop the site. Again, it will depend upon the figures, because the contention around that particular development planning was the height of it and the fact that it cut off views across the city from Clifford's Tower. So we will have to look at it, but these things do need to be able to wipe their face as well. You know, they need to be able to pay for themselves, and that's where the amount of flats that you build come into it. But these things will have to be weighed in the balance. We would initially be approaching it at the same number of units because there's already planning in place for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Healy, your next question.
Yeah, next question. Again, either executive member, you might want to ask advice from officers on this one. On terms of the abortive costs, so would I be right in thinking then that the majority of the car park design costs on the multi-story car park, you're going to have to abort, and that would hit the revenue budget this year? So that's question one. Question two, if you do change the design from what it has been before, both on the housing side and on the Eye of York side, wouldn't that then create another abortive cost on both of those? And then they would both have to come out of the revenue account as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Healy. The multi-storey car park costs, as I mentioned, it's between 500,000 and £1 million. The reason why we can't give an exact figure right now is because it's being calculated. But some of the planning costs, the project preparation costs, can be used for the other works that we want to do on that site. It's not that's why it takes a while to calculate, because if you do something else there are some of the costs that can contribute to that project, so they don't need to be written off as a revenue cost. They can be incorporated into the capital costs for your new project, and the same applies for the other sites. Where we do change a project, there may be some elements of the costs that will later come forward as a write-off, but not necessarily all, because some of the costs can be applied to the new changed project. And that's a very complex calculation that luckily we have professional officers who will do that work in the background on our behalf and bring forward the appropriate costs to be written off to the revenue budget. On the multi-storey car park costs, I think it's absolutely crucial that it is understood that, you know, right from the beginning, when the multi-storey car park on St. George's Field was first planned, everybody said it was a bad idea. It would never get off the ground, quite literally. Everybody said it was a waste of time and money, but the old Lib Dem Green administration pressed ahead with it. We got disregarding all the advice given from everyone, not just from us in opposition, but also from dozens of public speakers who just said, what on earth are you doing? And words to that effect. So they are costs that we have to write off as a result of the old administration pressing ahead with that in the face of all advice. And so we will write that off rather than spend £1.1 million a year of revenue paying for the borrowing to build the folly that would have been a multi-storey car park for the next 40 years. And if I have to write off £500,000 to £1 million this year to avoid having to pay £1.1 million every year for 40 years, then I think that's the right thing to do. And I think that's what York residents would expect us to do.
Just a quick supplementary, you mentioned the £1.1 million per year in borrowing costs relating solely to the multi-storey car park. I just wondered how that seems an awful lot, how that figure was arrived at.
I think officers would need to give any more detail on that, because obviously that's where we get the figures from.
If Patrick, if you're able to address.
So yeah, the capital cost of £15 million, if you borrowed it over 40 years, you've effectively having minimum revenue provision, that's the amount that you have to repay that borrowing plus interest, would be in the region of £1.1 million to service a debt of £15 million.
Over what period?
40 years.
Over 40 years. That's per annum.
Per annum, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have a supplementary, Councillor Healy?
So, given the, as you've just said, you're going to have to write off £500,000 to £1 million. Do you expect to do that this year?
Yes, as I've said, yes, because we have now made the decision not to do it.
Okay. Councillor Hollier?
Thanks. Just on that 1.1 million. So Councillor Eyre, when he spoke, said the original business case suggested £3 million of borrowing, whereas now we're talking about 15 million. I guess at what point did the 3 million become 15 million?
I think that's another question for officers. David, I think.
Who'd like to, sorry for the to and fro, but so can you just repeat the question again, Councillor Hollier?
Sorry, I think when Councillor Eyre spoke, he mentioned that the original business case for the multi-storey assumed £3 million worth of borrowing, but now we're assuming 15 million. I guess, and you know, that's what we're basing the cost to be repaid back on. At what point between, I guess, the original business case and now did the 3 million borrowing go up to 15 million and obviously then inflate the annual sort of loan repayment?
Thank you. So my name is David Warburton, Head of Regeneration. The January 2020 business case that's been referred to earlier assumed that there would be a cross subsidy from the sales of the market sales from the Castle Mills apartments to cross subsidise the cost of delivering the multi-storey car park. So the multi-storey car park costs were estimated at £15, but without any cross subsidy from apartment sales, then the full cost would have had to be borrowed now. 15 million, sorry.
Any further questions around those costing figures? Okay, thank you, David. Any other questions from members to executive members or to any other officers that we haven't brought to the table? Just in terms of the mention was made of the strategic review of parking. I remember when this was discussed at a previous meeting, we had a discussion as to whether it was a parking strategy or a strategic review of parking. And we think went round and round in circles with that one for a bit. In terms of, obviously that was a snapshot in time of what was in place at that time. What's the plan for that in terms of either a further iteration, perhaps through the local transport strategy, to potentially inform future decisions around business? You mentioned the business cases that would be worked up to support further decisions. Could you outline what your plans and expectations are in terms of taking that forward?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if memory serves me right, the strategic review of parking that was done previously was more like a strategic review of parking spaces that could be developed into residential or student accommodation, rather than the actual needs of people to park. So when we came into administration, the York bid shared with us the parking insights that they paid for. It's very thorough, it's a very professional report. It was in the hands of previous administration, and it shows you by car park, occupancy level by day, by hour, and where that's been driven from. So we've asked the York bid if we can submit that as part of our sort of the evidence for the review of parking needs in terms of the local transport strategy. And as I say, it's really instructive because it does show, and it's private car parks as well. It's not just council car parks. So it does show considerable capacity in the city. But, you know, what we're not trying to do is make sure that we can park all the cars that currently park in the city. What we are trying to do is reduce the amount of driven miles by 20%. That's the really tough thing to do. And if you start to do that, then you will begin to make much more efficient use of the space, and the need for the amount of parking space won't be the same, but you need to put things in that drive footfall. The only other sort of strategic parking review that we were looking at was the blue badge parking. And obviously our plans for Castle Car Park go some way to addressing the current situation of the lack of blue badge parking by having designated bays around the back of around near the Fenwick side, near the Coppergate side, as close to town as possible within that, and they'd be the only cars that are allowed to park in there.
Okay.
Don't know if that help.
Yeah. I suppose just on that, obviously I know the previous plan anticipated an overall, I think it was 30% net reduction in overall in terms of council parking capacity with the proposed closure of both Castle Mills and Castle and the proposed multi-storey car park. So are you still looking at a similar reduction in terms of overall provision from a sort of a council perspective? Yeah, well, if Catherine.
Yep, thank you. So the original business case was setting out a reduction of 222 spaces in total. Whilst we haven't yet finalised the designs for St George's Fields, so it's not an exact figure at this point. We're envisaging that the net loss could now be around 262 spaces, so an additional 40. The multi-storey car park was going to deliver 372 spaces, but because of revisions to the St George's Field layout, which will allow us to use the space differently and provide more surface level spaces than previously, and also the retention of the blue badge spaces at Castle Car Park. That's where the 40 difference comes from. So not a huge uplift in terms of the number of spaces lost.
Okay, thank you for that. Was that Councillor Hollier? Was that a new hand? Yes.
Got two, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Is it possible without going into a private session to say whether or not the rent received from Spark covers the interest payments on what we would get for the land if we sold it?
Who would like to offer an opinion on Nick Collins from Property Services? But just be mindful, obviously we're not in a position where we can actually talk about numbers. So if you want to repeat your question again for Nick's benefit, please.
Whether it's possible to say that the income we receive from Spark covers what we pay out in interest for, the value of that land, I guess, because obviously if we sold it, we'd have that money, we wouldn't have to, we'd have a lower amount of borrowing. Yes. Is the income we're getting from Spark covering what
I wish I could give you a simple yes and no. In valuation terms, it depends what you propose to sell it for, because depending on the particular use, they have very, very different values. And without going on about the whole market, the value for student accommodation would be very much different to residential accommodation, which will be different to retail accommodation, etc., etc. So I can't really ask that unless you actually have a very hypothetical debate about what we could put on there, and that depends on planning, etc.
Yes.
I'm quite confused by your question, Councillor Hollier, because you're talking about does it outweigh the cost of borrowing for what the entire council's borrowing, or borrowing for a specific thing, or you're asking us if the rental income outweighs the cost of borrowing? Borrowing for what?
Yeah, so the land has a value. If we sold the land, we would have a lower overall amount of borrowing across the council. Therefore, our interest payments overall across the council would be lower, Is the amount of money we receive from Spark covering that difference?
I mean, I think we're going so far into
Well, it
making it up.
as Nick said, it depends on the use of the site in terms of the income it would generate. So that's probably as far as we can go with that that question. You had a second question?
Yeah. Obviously, part of the changes are being driven by a kind of ideological desire for 100% affordable housing. If that proves unviable on Castle Mills, are you willing to look at lowering that amount of affordable housing so we at least get some? Or is it a case of all or nothing?
I think many York residents would not appreciate their desire to be able to afford to live in a home that's ideological. It should be a basic right, and it's not being driven by us, Councillor Hollier. It's what the people of York elected us to do, and we will pull out all the stops that we possibly can in order to make sure that happens on that site. And we've already seen that where your administration thought it could only deliver 40, maybe at a stretch 50% affordable homes on the Ordnance Lane site, we have challenged officers and they have responded magnificently, and we are building 100% affordable, genuinely affordable houses on that site. So we've already demonstrated that where there is a political will, there is a way, and that is what we want to, we'll pull out all the stops to make happen because we have that political will.
Councillor Hollier.
I mean, obviously the ideological aspect of it comes from the willingness to see no affordable homes on that site if you can't get 100%. So is 80% affordable homes better, that are built and exist, better than zero, waiting for a sort of hopeful eventual, maybe this will one day be viable option?
If Councillor Hollier, if you'd like me to just say whatever it is you want to put in a leaflet, then tell me what it is you want me to say. I mean, because you're asking such questions of the bleeding obvious that, it's almost insulting to the intelligence of anybody watching to answer. Yeah, of course we will achieve as many affordable homes as we can. The aim as it sits here is 100%, and that's what we intend to do.
Thank you. We're nearing the end of this session. Are there any further questions from members before we move into the next phase? I'm not seeing any hands, so thank you, Councillors Lomas and Kilbane. So we now move into closing statements. So first of all, if I can invite Councillors Stewart, Nichols and Waters to return, all three of you, or however many of you wish to come up. Okay, so on this case, you will have 3.5 minutes. Do you want me to divide that or just let you freewheel?
See how I go and the mic's
That's
there.
that's fair. Okay. Okay. Right. 3.5 minutes, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think from the point of view of the call-in, I mean, there were no questions raised of any aspects of our call-in. Now, given the aim is to be investigatory, as you said, and given the sums of money involved, I find that incredible. I can only assume that everybody takes our call-in entirely at face value, thinks it's entirely sensible, and therefore it's a formality, it will be called in. If it's not that case, then I'm amazed that so many councillors have so little interest in so much money and how it is spent. And unfortunately, it does seem we still, in some councillors' world, in a very, very confrontational, they did this, we did that, it's all good. Yet fundamentally, Castle Gateway as a project is no further on than it was 5 years ago. It's no further on than when it started meaningfully, except for there's been vast expense. Just to go on to a couple of points on parking, we're told by the executive member that Castle car park is rarely full, and it's one particular time, and when it is full, there is capacity in other car parks. I think that's totally red herring. It is known as a very full car park. It's off-puttingly full as a car park, and the user experience, you go around to other places where it might be free to park. I'm not saying we should be free in York, but you don't, as a visitor, turn up a Castle car park and go, oh dear, it is full today. I'll see if there's another car park I can go into. Go to another car park, that's full again, and then you find on your third or fourth car park there is space. That's not what we need to have capacity, and all the sort of good stuff that will hopefully happen about more people on public transport, more people cycling and walking hasn't yet happened. So cutting the car parking spaces is wrong. In terms of the point about some of the numbers, I mean, the Spark example is one of the most simple. Councillor Hollier's question was absolutely right in terms of if we did something with the land, we would get a capital receipt for that. That would save us interest. Is the Spark land sale at least covering that? Now, the officers have a very, very low expectation of what that land is worth. I believe entirely erroneously wrong. I'm not going to say anything private, don't worry. And of course, I'm not aware there is anything in the private papers about this anyway, so I didn't quite understand that part of the discussion among some members anyway. But even with the lowest expectation, we can't be told with a simple yes that we are making the bare minimum to cover the interest payment, the opportunity cost of that money. In other words, we are basically subsidising Spark, and to me, that's not acceptable. Equally, on the Coppergate pink papers, I've no idea where they're private. I just genuinely can't understand the precedent, the reason why. Coppergate's a unique site. It's the council as landowner with one freeholder. There's nothing comparable. I do not understand why that is private, and it's just going to cause more concerns amongst members. So I'm grateful that I assume the call-in is going to be accepted. It's going to be referred back to executive, and then we can have a more rigorous look at the figures, and hopefully have a cross-party sort of working. Thank
you. Well, very, very briefly then, if anybody's watched this meeting, they will see it's a perfect example of why local authorities are in the state they're in, both financially and operationally. Simple fact is, local authorities should not be property developers. Time and time again, every single time that this council gets involved in a major project, it's a financial disaster for the taxpayers of York. These schemes need to be put out to private developers who know what they're doing, who will be working to proper budgets and not having this carry on. If I briefly got the time, I would suggest all members actually listen to that song. I'm sure it was Delamitri, Nothing Ever Happens. This scheme goes on year after year after year. Listen to the words in that song and you'll see how it
you can draw your
resonates with this.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. You may return to your seats. And Councillor Eyre, if you would like to return, you two will have 3 minutes to make any, 3.5 minutes to make any further statements, comments you wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just come back and clarify a few points that were made. So we were told by the executive member that everybody was against the multi-storey car park. I quote from the bid letter that says specifically, for over 5 years, the bid board has been consistent in the view that it would support the removal of Castle car park on the premise that an MSCP would replace lost capacity. There appears to be a selective deafness in terms of who everybody is. And I reiterate that letter, and the speaker that said the same today, only 18% of people, businesses surveyed supported not replacing the multi-storey car park. We were told that the income would come from the displacement parking. Full council recently, Councillor Kilbane said that it'd be a 50-50 split between the Q Park and Coppergate, probably. The more astute people will know that the Q Park is not ours, so that income will not be coming to us, that will be going to the private sector, and Coppergate will close when all non-essential travel is taken from outside the city centre. The bid did read that, and that's when they came up with the conclusion that they didn't support the lack of multi-storey car park. In terms of homes delivered, there would have been 40 affordable homes. Councillor Kilbane was clear again, there will not be any. Possibly some may be in the ground by 2026, 2027. Castle Mills, no chance. The borrowing issue on Spark that Councillor Hollier mentioned, it's not top secret. I can tell you what the figures are. That's £500,000 to £1 million that will have to be borrowed by this council to meet the capital programme that it didn't have to do if it sold the site. That's a revenue cost every year of £40,000 to £80,000, which dwarfs the amount of income that Spark will be getting. The discussion of meanwhile use of Castle Mills, I think perhaps we need to be talking to the court, as most of the suggestions that were made in this meeting have been opposed by the court previously. In fact, a lot of those were told that they had to move. I think the point of this call-in was for executive members to be able to show you that they had full grasp of all the financial figures, all the financial implications, and a robust knowledge. They haven't done that today. A number of questions they had to push to officers to get them to answer for them. They need to have that information if they're the decision makers, and they've clearly indicated they don't really know what the figures are. It's incumbent to send this back to them, let them get the figures out, let everybody analyse those figures properly, so the true cost of the taxpayer of up to £15 million to £20 million is actually genuinely known.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. You may return to your seat. So now, executive members, you have a total of 7 minutes to make any further comments or statements that you wish.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd just like to invite you to encourage Councillor Eyre to use less disability discrimination, because being deaf should never be used as an insult against anybody. But getting to the point, I won't apologise for making sure that I get technical details right by checking with our professional officers who are technically qualified to not only put the figures together, but to advise us on them. As Councillor Eyre very well knows, the executive member for finance is not and should not be, in fact, an accountant. We employ skilled professional staff to do those things for us. So, of course, it's relevant and appropriate that when people quote made up figures to us, we check with officers. When people ask us questions in the most roundabout, bizarre way, we check with officers to make sure that we are getting things right. That is the right thing to do. And I think that actually demonstrates that we follow the principles of good decision-making in the Constitution, because we do get that technical and professional advice from officers and we listen to it. I think it's quite astounding that that Councillor Eyre is talking about Castle Mills and talking about the cost of the site. That Councillor Waters is saying we should just give everything to private developers. We did that. Well, rather, the old Lib Dem administration did it, and the developers gave it back because they couldn't make the money out of it. So what we're doing is we are pausing until we are in a position where we are confident we can move ahead with development on that site. It's not complicated and it's not a difficult concept, but I appreciate that it's not very well liked because we are changing the plans that were put in place by the old administration.
Just, actions speak louder than words. So we'll see where we are in 1, 2, 3 and 4 years' time when the public can decide on whether or not what we've done with repurposing Castle car park is was good or not. And just take on board Councillor Stewart's remarks about when we repurpose the car park, making sure that other things are in place. Absolutely, we need to make sure that we're sequencing this. We're not just sort of randomly repurposing the car park and as if it's just something you do in isolation. We want to make sure that everything's joined up. I kind of resent the allegations that we're somehow doing this out of some crazy ideology of people being able to afford living in a home. One of the reasons that we're in the situation that we're in now is that actually the the multi-storey car park was driven through by the previous administration, even though people knew all along really it wasn't even going to wipe its face. And so much so that when the initial planning permission for it was deferred by the planning committee because of all the doubts that were around it, when that committee was reconvened, the Liberal Democrat member who had voted for deferral was no longer on that committee. And we've been led to understand that he was replaced in order to make sure that the Liberal Democrats didn't lose the argument, because they will go to any lengths to try and win an argument. It seems to be what they live for. We'll let them carry on arguing in a corner. We'll get on with delivering for the people of York.
Thank you. Okay, now we're moving to the next phase of the meeting, which is where I ask each member in turn to make any contributions they wish on either or both of the call-in requests. And each member will have no more than 5 minutes to make any observations or comments that you wish. You don't feel under any obligation to go on 5 minutes, or you can. It's entirely up to you what you say and how long you speak for within that 5 minute envelope, and you can address your remarks to either or both of the call-in requests. Okay, so Councillor Clark, do you want to go first?
Nothing to add, really.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. This isn't a you don't get to pick. I'm going to go back and forth. Councillor One.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've listened to what everyone was saying. It's not something I've spent an awful lot of time thinking about prior to coming to this call-in. But I think what we've heard is that there's not enough detail in the reports that went to executive. It really didn't seem from the answers to some of the questions from the executive members that they have a total handle on what's going on. And I acknowledge that it is for officers to advise on it, but I do think there were some gaps in knowledge there that I would expect an executive member to not have those gaps in the knowledge. So that's where I'm coming at this from. I don't want to take up any more of the committee's time.
Thank you. I'll go back to the other side of the room now, and Councillor Steele's Walsall.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Healy, now you can have your turn.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll learn for next time. My comments on this reflect Councillor Ryan's, really. When I did first read this, when it did go to the executive, I was quite surprised that there was so little detail, but there were assertions around changing in market conditions, cost inflation on the old scheme, but there were no real numbers on it. So from as I sit here, I still couldn't tell a resident why the old scheme from a financial perspective was not deliverable. And given the old scheme is where we were, I'm surprised that wasn't there. What's then happened is that scheme has had various components taken out of it. And we've then said to the officers, please go away with these various components taken out. Again, with no real finances on how those components then affect the whole. But I'd like you to accept that the new scheme is now this. So there's no multi-story car park. The current car park will turn into something, which I'm still not quite clear on. It's a green community, healthy, child-friendly space. Picking up on the point that the Councillor Eyre made about the courts, I would imagine they wouldn't be massively keen on a play park, even though personally I would quite like to see more child provision in the city centre. And then on the actual site itself, for the housing, it's very lacking in detail. It shouldn't be that difficult given the fact that we do develop sites for a range of affordabilities, and Ordnance Lane would be a good example where we have managed to push it up to 100%, to actually bring some detail forward, not so much so the executive members can make that decision, but just so that the public can just sort of see somehow that when we are talking about millions of pounds and multi-millions of pounds, that they're informed as much as the executive members who are informed. Councillor Eyre has obviously seen some updated business case on this that we've not been privy to. We should be trying to put as much in the papers around the finances and just in general. And council papers almost seem to be trying to put the minimum in there to support a decision and not look at alternatives. So I would encourage that it is sent back. We do have clearly in probably a table form, you know, this is option A, B, C, and D. Policy choice X, Y, and Z affect it this way, so that it's in the public domain for the public to be able to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Myers, is anything you would like to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hollier.
Thanks, Chair. It's a bit of an irony at the end of Councillor Kilbane's remarks that he talked about delivering for York, because this is a plan that basically guarantees a lack of delivery, and particularly on that affordable housing. And until people can live in Labour's election promises, we do actually need a pragmatic approach to delivering affordable houses that isn't based on simply, you know, all or nothing ideological battles. I think throughout, it's clear through the papers and in the what's been said that there isn't a clear handle on the figures. We don't know how much money we're writing off. We don't know how much money we get from Spark and whether that covers the interest. The very concept of opportunity cost seemed to blow the executive member for Finance's mind. I'm no clearer really on any of the figures that are in the papers than I was at the beginning. And I think on that basis, it's fairly clear that the paper needs putting back to the executive. All we've had really is obfuscation and deflection, and I can assure Councillor Kilbane that I have enough content for my leaflets from the last 6 months of this Labour administration as I will need for any amount of time. I really don't need any more. I'd really rather you stop. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Nothing further to add from me.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I still have the scars from trying to get an ice rink close to the courts. I think an officer who is now retired was threatened with contempt of court if we didn't withdraw that. So I think the potential for there being a Christmas fairground is quite minimal. I think learning from previous projects is that once you start to unpick and unravel parts of an existing scheme, you have to have all of the background in place to demonstrate that this new scheme all stacks up and that all of the complexities of doing anything in a city centre location, because of the heritage of the complexities of planning and the underground utilities, it's not an easy thing to switch from one scheme to another. And therefore there does need to be that demonstration of all of the components having worked, and also people being familiar with what the consequences will be. And there's a whole raft of different speakers today raising issues from a retailer's point of view, and there is no identikit retailer. Each one has a different perspective on who's coming to their shop, what they're buying. But I think there's a collective view that would need to be fully familiar and content with what's being proposed. And I'm not sure that we are at that point, let alone the multi-million-pound programme, which is now being switched quite quickly. And I would say from previous examples, it's not a recipe for success. So I am concerned at what's being proposed here, and I would urge court that it's referred back.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I think an ideological battle that produces affordable housing and for young people in the city is a good one to have, and that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
I think we've had a very good question and answer session with the executive members today. And contrary to some of the comments on the other side of the table, I think they have actually answered the questions that were put. Point being made about the financial questions when the officer was asked, backed up exactly what the executive member had said. So I'm not quite sure how some of the members opposite came to a different conclusion. But coming back to the core of this, clearly there is a new administration in place with different political priorities, and they've had to review this project. I think, frankly, some of the members opposite and some of the speakers earlier are spreading illusions about the potential for having continued this project in its original concept. That takes no account of COVID, the massive inflation and other economic disruption that we've had, the major changes in borrowing costs, all the rest of it. What was a very ambitious, pretty high risk project, which was a positive thing to have done originally when it was first conceived, has been derailed by circumstances. But to pretend that you can put it all back together in the way that it was, it is fantasy. And I think in that sense, there are important points to have been learned from what's happened, and some of those have been made around the table, and I'm sure the executive members will take those on board. I think in terms of the core of the call-in about process, I think we have I'm satisfied by what's been said today, that proper process has been carried out. That said, I think it would be helpful if there was a change in tack in terms of how reports are prepared, that fuller information is provided, so that we don't, as has already happened on a previous occasion, we end up at these meetings asking questions and getting answers that could have been put in reports. And I think if that's possible, and I appreciate that there's a cost and a time element for officers, I think that would be helpful. But in terms of the financial information, we've had the assurance from the exec members, repeating what was in the papers, that proper business cases will be brought forward when the real decisions have to be made. And obviously and I'm sure others will look to see that those reports do justify the conclusions and the recommendations at that point in time. So, as I say, I think it has been a helpful debate and question and answer session today, but I do not think there has been a breach of the rules to justify a reference back to the executive.
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
I've nothing further to add.
Thank you. So just from my perspective, I think Councillor Stewart alluded to it, that there is a consensus that members want this project to succeed in whatever form it comes to pass, and obviously it has been through a number of iterations. So I think we, in general, are after the same thing. I suppose the frustration I have is that this could have been quite a useful pre-decision scrutiny discussion, and there may have been sort of timing issues that meant that couldn't happen. And we did have the beginnings of a discussion when we had a discussion on as a major project. It came to this committee for really an update as to where we were. I think it's a frustration that we couldn't have had this discussion and explored some of the options and unpacked some of the issues in that kind of arena. I think that probably would have enabled us to have perhaps moved forward with a better degree of consensus. There's probably never going to be complete consensus. Even I appreciate that. I mean, I suppose taking the discussion around affordable housing as an example, I co-authored a scrutiny report with Councillor Pavlovic, one of the recommendations of which was to, in future iterations of the Housing Delivery Plan programme, to increase the proportion of affordable housing on council on site. So I think that's something that executive accepted that recommendation. So again, there is a degree of consensus. It's then a question of, well, how do you deliver that, and what trade-offs are there? And that's a discussion that probably will be had and should be had, because I think again there is a general consensus on the desirability of that. I think what I suppose is disappointing in terms of the level of financial information that was provided in this report. I fully appreciate there will be business cases coming back, but better understanding some of the trade-offs in terms of aborted costs and income that will need to be made up in future financial years as a result of some of these decisions. I think having better visibility of that would have been helpful, and I think would have enabled members to so better understand the vision that the administration is looking to deliver. So I think that was disappointing. I think it's about understanding impacts, understanding the trade-offs where they do exist, so that we can, wherever possible, ensure a degree of consensus on outcome, if not on the roadmap to getting there. Okay, so we've all had our 5 minutes. So we move on to the next stage. So we'll begin with the first call-in we heard, which was from Councillors Stewart, Nichols and Waters. And I will ask you each in turn to state whether you consider the core principles identified in Councillor Stewart's call-in were or were not breached. And just as a reminder, Councillor Stewart's call-in referred to the decision not meaningfully considering all alternatives, and where reasonably possible, considering the views of the public, and not having taken account of all relevant matters, both in general and specific, and ignore any irrelevant matters. So those were the alleged breaches in Councillor Stewart's call-in. So what I will do now is ask each member in turn to indicate whether they believe there has been a breach or there has been no breach. I'm going to start with Councillor Clark again.
Thank you, Chair. Not breached.
No, thank you. Councillor Steele-Walshaw.
Not breached.
Councillor Myers.
Not breached.
And you're on my list. Councillor Kelly.
Not breached.
Councillor Baxter.
Not breached.
Councillor Merritt.
Not breached.
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
Not breached.
Councillor Wan.
Breached.
Councillor Healy.
Breached.
Councillor Hollier.
Breached.
Councillor Waller.
Breached.
And for me, breached. That is 5 members believing that those principles have been breached and 7 believing not. So that call-in request falls. So we will do the same this time for Councillor Ayres calling, and the reasons for calling in relation to Councillor Ayres' request was that the decision did not take into account all of the relevant matters, both in general and specific, and ignore any irrelevant matters. So, same procedure again, members. So, starting with Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. Not breached.
Thank you. Councillor Steels-Walshaw.
Not breached.
Councillor Myers.
Not breached.
Councillor Kelly.
Not breached.
Councillor Baxter.
Not breached.
Councillor Merritt.
Not breached.
Councillor Burton.
Not breached.
Councillor Wan.
Breached.
Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Breached.
Councillor Hollier.
Breached.
Councillor Waller.
Breached.
And for me, breached. And the outcome is the same in that 7 saying there's been no breach and 5 that there's been a breach. Therefore, that call-in request falls. Okay. We're nearly there. So, given that no breach is the outcome for both call-in requests, members of the committee may continue the meeting to suggest any areas they consider worthy of further future exploration via the scrutiny function. So I'll start by simply suggesting that as within our remit as the committee that receives updates on major projects, that we continue to receive updates on the Castle Gateway project with a particular plea that requests that at key decision points going forward, where there are decisions to be made, you know, albeit the direction of travel is set, if there are decisions that will influence the future direction of the revised scheme, for the administration to use those meetings as an opportunity to as a sounding board to discuss any issues that, where there are potentially a number of options, a number of ways to achieve the desired outcome, which is, as a committee, is far more useful than receiving an update which we note and then we go away afterwards. I think we can hopefully add some value and have a productive and constructive discussion, as are the best kind of discussions. Do any members have any other suggestions they would like to make in terms of future actions on the back of this evening's discussion? No. Okay. I've come to the end of my crib sheet telling me what to do next.
You'll need to vote on that, so see if anybody wants to formally support that.
Okay. So the suggestion I've just articulated was, would anybody like to express their support for that or opposition to that? All in favour? Yes, Councillor Merritt.
Sorry, I was just going to say, pre-scrutiny is obviously preferable. It's not always possible. And so long as I think that caveat's understood, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what we found with the new combined authority and the governance arrangements and things not being available at the right time for us to do pre-scrutiny. But clearly pre-scrutiny is better than inquest afterwards.
Any other observations or comments? But so I can ask members if they're content with that proposition. Thank you. So I think that concludes that item. There is no urgent business. We're not looking at the work plan because we're doing that next week. So thank you, members, and officers for your attendance and contribution, and I wish you good night.